Okay,
Perfect. I think we're all set.
awesome. Okay, thanks everybody. So like and said, I'm Megan. I work at the Botanical Garden. And as some of you know, we do ex situ conservation work um up up north. So part of all of this, I guess, is sort of a transfer of knowledge between like Todd to me, and me just really loving studying all these plants and ecosystems and being really keen to learn as much as I can. So that sort of came in the form of last summer. It was actually a North American Rock Garden Society organized a like botanical tour up the Northern Peninsula, what the West Coast, it's Serpentine Barrens. So I went up there, I guess, as a participant, but to learn as much as I could. So it was a bit more structured, maybe, than just what I've done before, which is basically just gallivanting around and looking at sort of whatever I could find. So this was sort of like the breakdown of what we saw. So it was June June 28th to July 4th last summer. So I'm mostly talking about what I saw on this trip, mostly because the other trip I went on, the my phone camera was really bad, and the photos aren't fit to show you. But now I have a great one, so I'll show you these. And I saw a lot more, and I don't think there wasn't anything that I saw in the previous trips that I didn't see in this one. So there were so I was not a guide on this trip. I was just a little sponge following Todd around, but there were 19 of us, so 7 participants and 2 guides. So before the tour, Todd sent out a list of like everything possible that we could possibly find, which have 462 plants on it. Of those plants, we saw 208. And out of those 108, 107 were new or confirmed for me. So this, for example, was, going up and seeing the willows and saying, okay, like that for sure is Jejuna or Vestita or whatever. We saw 2 endemic species. So by endemic, I mean species that don't grow anywhere else in the world. So that was Brea longii and Salix jejuna. We saw 19 species of orchid, which was interesting because this time of year, we weren't sure what we were going to see, but everything was early. So we were able to see quite a bit. So a lot of little green orchids, if you know the orchids in Newfoundland. Um, 11 species of fern, 3 S1 rare plants. So that means there's 5 or fewer occurrences in the province, and 12 S2 rare plants, and then lots of sort of in between ones. And then things kind of went awry because I expected to go home and just launch back into the garden. But I actually smashed my ankle on Burnt Cape and then was laid up for many, many months, which was the silver lining was that I got to do a very deep dive into all of these plants. And I ended up finding a course that was super, super helpful. Number one, it's free. Number two, and it turned out that since I've done that course, I actually use it at the garden. So it's called the Rare Plant Academy at the Center for Plant Conservation. And they unite a lot of people that are interested in conserving plants, and they provide them resources and community. So this was the professional development course, but really anyone that has any interest in rare plant conservation, in rare plants in general, really in plants in general, I think would get a lot out of it. And for me, because my background is landscape horticulture, I didn't do like a degree in biology, for example. There were some things that this course really helped me fill in. And it was great because going into sort of our ex situ conservation work, these are the folks that have developed like the best practices for like seed collection and that sort of thing. And we started all sorts of things. So population assessment and monitoring, seed collection and baking, germination and propagation. And I heard about it because the Botanical Garden is one of the only Canadian members of Botanical Garden Conservation International, which made me feel really proud about the work that we do, but also we're kind of big part of this bigger picture. So sometimes when you can get a little bit down about the state of the world and people destroying the environment, it's nice to know that there's people all over the place that care. So some of this is probably not new to you, but a lot of this information, it was just nice to have things like broken down in a really clear way. So earlier I said that we had seen a bunch of S1 and S2 plants, and for a long time I wasn't really sure what the S stood for. So in this case, plants that are all ranked by how rare they are or how threatened they are in the world. So in Newfoundland, we use like S1, S2, S3 because that's our like provincial rank. But each one of those provincially ranked plants will have a national and a global ranking. So for example, you could have a plant that is G5, it's secure worldwide because there's many populations worldwide. But in Newfoundland, there may only be like one or two populations, which makes it rare. So this is really interesting in looking at, we were, unfortunately, Trump slashed the funding, but we were going to enter into like an alpine seed conservation partnership with Denver Botanic Garden. And when we were talking about plants that they would be interested in, they were interested in ones that maybe the ones that we were interested in sometimes overlapped and sometimes didn't. And we obviously wouldn't collect anything that was ranked provincially. But it was just interesting having the conversations about what they were interested in. And because genetics is so prevalent now, people are doing a lot of genetic work. Having specimens of all these things is really valuable. But unfortunately, yeah, I don't want to talk about that. That's sad. Okay. All right. So why are some plants rare? So I'm not going to talk too much about this. I think we sort of understand, but they can be rare for a bunch of different reasons. So they could be, it's hard for us to know this distribution of a lot of these plants, even going back to like Fernald's collections. It's hard to know, before settlers what our ecosystems would have looked like. So something could be historically rare. So it wasn't always rare, but humans have made it rare. But then there's also plants that just are naturally rare because of the way that they grow or where they grow. And then there's others that have been abundant, but due to like historic events like floods or climate change or something of that manner, they're a lot more threatened. And some things will become rare in the future because of climate change. So there's a guy named Rabinowitz. He did this lovely chart for us about rarity. So these are the 7 forms of rarity. So this one right here, so locally abundant over a large range in several habitats. That's the only one of these that isn't rare. So it mostly talks about different aspects that come into play to make a plant rare. So it can be, so for example, down in this right-hand corner, constantly sparse and geographically restricted in specific habitat, that would probably be like the most rare. So we think about something like Brea, where it is geographically and within its ecosystem restricted. The limestone barrens are like rare in Newfoundland anyway. and then the nature of that plant and how it competes with other plants. Something like the diamondback moth that is now a threat to that plant. That's probably a plant that was always naturally rare, I would guess, but I don't know. I could definitely be wrong. I'd be happy to be corrected by all the talented people in the room. So this sort of helped me understand, like, when we're looking at plants, like, why, I never really thought of before, like, oh, okay, well, what makes something rare? It was just sort of like, okay, that plant is rare, that's cool. But it sort of helped me set up in my brain how to navigate all of this stuff. So the rare plants. So we did see some of the rarest of the rare. So on the left here is Brea which I always think it's so funny that this plant is so important, and I love it, but it's not exactly a jaw-droppingly beautiful plant. And on the right here, maybe the more attractive of the two, the striped coral root. So this is an orchid, and it's interesting where we found this plant. It's sort of been like moving around this one general area. And we did, just moments before I fell out of Burnt Cape, saw the leaves of Calypso bulbosa, but we did not see a flower. So we don't think that site flowered this year. We didn't see any evidence of flower stalks, but I will still count it. And the Calypso is a great example of plants that are really rare in the province, but when I lived in BC, Calypso was everywhere. Well, maybe not everywhere, but it was, I had seen it several times. It's not an uncommon plant. So when I moved here and everyone was raving about Calypso, like it's lovely, but I had a moment of, oh, okay. That's different. But everywhere is different. Okay, so yeah, there wasn't a lot of S1, but we wouldn't expect that because S1s are very rare. So then we had some S2 occurrences. So I will also say that not all of this is necessarily limestone barrens. Like this striped coral root was on the west coast, and I don't think I want to say that it wasn't in a limestone environment. I'm fairly certain. Okay, so here we have our native sweet cecily, so Osmariza bertollia, and I love this plant. The texture of it is quite strange, and I was so happy to find it because it's, in a sea of green. What you're looking for is these yeah, is sort of the stringy bits that stand up. I guess they're gonna be seed pods soon. Also, I don't know if you can see where my cursor is. If
Yes,
you can't,
Megan, we can see it
you
fine.
can't. Okay,
Yeah,
perfect. Because I'll
perfect.
use that sort of
Thank
as
you.
a
Yeah.
pointer. Perfect. Yeah, and for some reason I was well, for all these plants I was tickled to see them. It's like life's best scavenger hunt to look for these plants. But I will say this a lot, but this is one of the plants I had read a lot about and was excited to see. Okay, and then we have Cerastium. So Cerastium alpinum, more in the limestone environment, and then Beringianum is found in the Serpentine Barren. So you can see the difference in the color of the rock, right? And you can kind of get a bit of the serpentine sense from the one on the right. Some scrubby specimens, but still very exciting to see. And on the left, we have what I know as Minuartia marcescens. This is a near endemic, so it only really grows here, and from what I know, on the Gaspe Peninsula. And there's quite a few plants like that. So we've managed to find the one tiny flower. We were very lucky, because otherwise it would have been hard to spot. And then on the right, we have Potentilla littoralis. So this is sort of the beginning of lots of tiny, non-shrubby Potentilla, like more herbaceous. And not to be confused with the Daisiphora that are all over the place. So again, Minuartia is serpentine and Potentilla is limestone variants. Okay, and then we have our world famous, the largest orchid in North America, Cypripedium redinae, the showy lady slipper. And it sort of goes to show too when you're doing this sort of work, how like we found on the very first day that we were there on the West Coast, we found a whole sea of these lady slippers growing on the side of the road, and then found like 2 or 3 other sites within a couple days, and it was such a joy, because we like I know that they're rare, but to see that many was really exciting. But also, if you know where to look, something can maybe not feel rare to you, but it is rare in the grander scheme of things. And it was interesting the color variation between them. And I haven't quite figured out, it didn't seem to be necessarily like consistent across like environmental factors. Some of them are quite light, some of them are darker, some of them are a little bit more faded. But this is one that I would love to have in cultivation, but I was told that orchid seeds have a strong like fungal association, so sometimes something like this might be hard to, and again, because it's rare, I wouldn't do that anyway. Okay. And then this plant is a very special plant for me. This is the first rare plant that I ever found on my own. So this is the vanilla scented bog orchid. So Pseudo-orchestramia. And I love it also because there are many little green orchids, but this one's just a little less green and a little bit easier to identify, and it does smell fantastic. And when I found it for the first time, I was so excited. I was lying on the ground looking at it, and a conservation officer came over to me and said, "You must be a botanist." And then we shook hands, and it was lovely. But yeah, this is a very special plant for me. I feel like many people have those plants that remind them of like their journey through learning about different plants and sort of where you were at that time. And for me, this plant represents like the amount that I've learned and the work that I've put into learning about these plants and about this ecosystem. And this is another one that, though it's quite rare, I feel very privileged to have seen it in many locations at this point, where it's kind of like an old friend. Okay. So this little weirdo sort of tripped me up. There was a day and I was sort of off by myself, and I'd found this Malaxis, the photo on the right, and I took a picture of it. And I really didn't know what it was. And this day was pretty fast paced, so I was sort of running around, and when I got home, I looked it up and thought it was Malaxis, but I wasn't sure. And then showed Todd, and he said, "You saw that without me." And then the next day we found 2 more sites, which is great. So this is Malaxis monophylos var brachypoda. And this is a very tiny orchid. But I don't know if I can zoom in, but you can see, this is why I'm glad I got a new camera. You can really see all the parts at play here. It's very, oops. And it reminds me of Minianthemum almost, with the way that the flower is, but very tiny, tiny, tiny. There's a theme of tonight, and it's tiny plants that are blown up to look like big plants. Okay. Here's some other ones. This elegant pussy toes on the left is sort of like the vanilla scented bog orchid for me. For some reason, I love this plant and I don't know why. Maybe it's because its common name, like elegant pussy toes, just cracks me up every time. And also because I don't think it looks elegant at all. I really like that. This is another S2 quite rare plant, and it's among many Entenaria that you'll find on the limestone barrens. I didn't realize there were so many, so it was cool to sort of go on a hunt for them. But this is the first one that I had ever found on my own, and it's sort of easier to find because it's much bigger than the rest. On the other, but it's funny, it doesn't really look, when I think of an Antonaria, like the ones that we have at the garden, they're very sort of like a low ground cover, and then they have a flower stalk come up, where this one has a slightly different shape. And on the right, we have Plantanthera hookeri, which is one of the many sort of small green orchids that are always a bit of a struggle to ID. This one makes it easy because the basal leaves are, that's sort of for me where the identification sort of starts with a lot of these green orchids. And with hookeri, it's sort of like beefier than a lot of them, and much harder to find. Poor Todd was like out running the barrens for a while. It took him quite a while to find this, but he did end up finding it. And you can see in behind, that was last year's flower stalk, and it made it much easier to actually find it, because that flower stalk is, if you can believe it, like a little bit more of a contrast than this green color when you're out on the barrens. Okay, and these were sort of the spicy ones that we found one day. Again, these were ones that I was really, really hoping we would find. I feel like Bartzia is like a local celebrity in my mind. I had made like a flashcard that had Bartzia on it, and I was really hoping to find it. And we did, and we were looking for it in one spot and didn't find it, and I had given up hope that we were going to find it. And then went into a completely different section and it was there. So there's sort of a happy accident that we found it. And I think that's kind of the nature of doing this sort of work too, where you're trying to keep track of where things are, and then sometimes things wander, or sometimes, you know, someone new is cutting the grass around the cemetery and kills something. Yeah, it's good to have another set of eyes and sort of like a fresh perspective, and to go into different places. Yeah, and on the left we have Galerius, which used to be Amber Orchis, rotundifolia. Again, really small, but quite plentiful in the little patch that we had found. And this was great. This was a result of Oren, who was the other guide. He would sort of be the scout, so he would sort of run these great distances and do a sweep for things, which is great because we as a group would never do that sort of thing. And then we'd hear him shouting from out yonder and go running. So how I broke my ankle is not a mystery. Okay. Okay, so we did spend some time. Okay, so we are out of the rare plants now. So those were all the S2s that were left. So now we're into more like forest ecology. There's not many here, but I did want to share some of them. Maybe because, like me, these were like chapters and field guides that, for the first 2 years I would skip over because I thought I would never see these plants. Because at the time, the idea of traveling to see plants was still out of my reach, and now I'm very grateful that it isn't. So another local celebrity for me, Monesis uniflora. For some reason, I always wanted to see this plant. It has a really interesting structure. Again, tiny. Definitely in the forest. Yeah, and this is Berry Hill Pond. So not far from Deer Lake. And then on the right, Plantanthera obtusata. So again, of the little green orchids, you can't quite see the basal leaves here, but does look quite different from the hookers, right? The hooker's iris here. Hooker's orchid, sorry. But this is a good point to make that with a lot of these plants, you have to like look at them all the time, like in books or it's almost like pattern recognition, because if you were to see those two plants for the first time, if you weren't already familiar with their structure um or like their sizes or the different sizes of the leaf, you could be really confused. So at the end I have some like plant ID tips, but I think that really helped me. Like a lot of these plants, I was seeing them for the first time, but I wasn't, I'd seen them hundreds of times before and studied them, and not even like study on purpose, right? Just like flipping through, like it's great to have as a coffee table sort of book, or going through like Sue's website or John's website. There's a lot of that. Okay, so more Berry Hill Pond. So Viburnum nudum was in full form. So that's the northern wild raisin. And Plantanthera orbiculata. So again, we're looking at those lower leaves. So orbiculata has these like huge shiny leaves. And again, when we're scanning and doing like pattern recognition, those big shiny leaves are going to be way easier to see, at least like in my opinion, from like the flower parts. And if you're really good, you just find the leaves, even if it's not in flower, but I don't know if I'm there yet. But again, a lot of similarities between these two, right? They bloom slightly different times. The orbiculata wasn't quite open. Okay. And then we went on to Western Brook Pond for the Arethusa, which do not want to sit still for the camera. I find them quite hard to photograph. It's like the one on the right here, it's like they're all looking in different directions. It's hard to get the right angle, so I apologize for that. But in the sea of little green orchids, which I love, it was also really nice to see something a little bit spicier in the Arethusa. Um, yeah, okay. Okay, and this one has a little story. So all over the place, like limestone barrens and here on the way to Western Brook Pond, we'll see Plantanthera aquilonis and huronensis. And the big difference between the two is scent. So there was a lot of getting down on the ground to have a sniff to see. But it was interesting after I went home and I was uploading all this to iNaturalist, ended up having really cool conversations about sort of like the origins of these orchids, what it like whether something is Aquilonis and Hernensis, like by just looking at a photo. And then there were some folks who were sort of international orchid nerds that thought that some of these might be actually a third species, which is called Hyperborea, which has a very little documentation. I think there's only one, Sue, according to your website, the Euphoria. But it was really interesting to think that there is like a third species out there, and then hopefully I have the next 40 years to study and hopefully find out if it's actually here or not. I'm not sure if I'm totally convinced, but it's a great challenge. This is a good challenge, and this is from eFlora. So Sue me this great graphic about how difficult it is. This was my background on my computer for a while because I really wanted to get it. I think at this point I'm getting there, but it's also nice just to smell an orchid as you're walking by. But yeah, this is this is how fun and tricky sometimes it can be. Okay. Yeah, and Huronensis is the smelly one if you're ever out and about. Oh, and these are quite a bit larger than many of the other ones. And I find they're easier to identify. They're a bit more characteristic. Okay. And just a couple more on the way of Western Burr Pond. This is very much in the not rare segment of this presentation. But still, this Nidus cicericium, I've grown it many times in cultivation, so it was kind of cool to see it in the wild. And Viburnum trilobum, which is always just so strikingly beautiful. You can kind of see why people have brought it into cultivation, and it sort of reminds us of many other plants in cultivation. Okay, and then onto the serpentine barren. So nature's rock garden, but browner and made of ocean crust. So this is where we went. And you can really see why they're called serpentine, right? It looks like snake skin. Really quite beautiful. Obviously I was very into the plants, but even the overall landscape is quite stunning and also profoundly confusing because you're looking at what looks like to be the surface of the moon, but there's water that runs underneath everything. So you're just looking out and you're like, for my plant brain, I'm expecting to see certain plants, and then you see other plants that, like this pitcher plant that doesn't quite belong. So it's really interesting to be there. And I never spent a ton of time there, so it felt really special. And again, lots of plants that were sort of my local celebrities that I got to see in person after years. So this is one of them. I think the ferns and the serpentine barrens are some of the best in the province. So we have this royal fern, and it's so interesting. We think of these plants, you see them in a book and it's like the perfect specimen, like big and bushy, but these were actually quite small. They were maybe only like 3 inches high. Some of them, other ones like this one to your right was a little bit more beefy, but there was a lot of different plants at different stages of development, and they're quite beautiful when they're this small. Like if you look at the veins, they're quite pronounced. So it felt quite royal. It almost looks like a crown. I don't know if that's why they're called that. And this one on the right has two of the ferns that I was looking for. So we get on to the next one. So this is our native maidenhair fern, Adiatum aluticum, the Aleutian maidenhair fern. And again, picture, or at least you can picture a big bushy fern, but there is many times where there is only maybe one frond and just a little bit of black, and the texture is what hits you. So it's a good reminder that when we're looking for these plants in the wild, to sort of adjust our scale and expectation. Like, for example, if you're looking for, oh, okay, well, I've done it now. If you're looking for this Amororchis or this Galeris, and you're expecting to see, you see this picture and this is what we expect it to look like, and then you get there and it's only, like 2 or 3 inches high. If that, I think more, maybe closer to 2 inches. It kind of rattles your brain a little bit. So yeah, looking at heights are very important. Okay, so going back, sorry. So here we have some of the more common serpentine plants, but again, if we were on the Avalon, these would be quite exotic. So the sticky asphodel, it is quite sticky all the way up the stem. And I did really like this range in color. It goes from the white to the unopened buds are pink. So we saw quite a bit of that. And then this Daisy so this sort of native shrubby potentilla was everywhere and it was in bloom. So that was really nice to get little pops of yellow. And as we see everywhere, the most common campanula, but that one can be tricky too. There was a few times that I thought that I was finding a gentian and it was just like I feel like in this is how I expect to see it, this sort of tall, but it can get quite stunted. So it can look like other things that are more exotic, and then I would get excited and then I would have to be knocked back down because it was just a campanula, but we love her anyway. And then in the Selene. So I don't remember. I want to say Selene is the newest name. I think all the lichens have now become Selenes. Um, Alpine fly. Don't remember the common name. Anyway, it was sort of just coming out of bloom. We missed it. But the flower stalks did definitely help us find it. And for me, it was really cool to see native Selene because in rock garden, like as a rock gardener, we grow many, many different kinds of Selene. So to see one like this that is sort of closer to the ones that we have in cultivation was really exciting for me. And Rhododendron lapponicum. So we have this plant in our limestone barren garden at the botanical garden. There's not a ton of limestone barrens plants that have made it in that garden, but our specimen actually looks quite a bit like this. I wasn't sure if it was just suffering because it's trying to live in St. John's when it's from the Northern Peninsula, but or not from St. John's. But pretty much all the specimens I saw looked quite a bit like that. And what's really interesting about this plant is in sort of the rhododendron cultivation world, they're trying to use this plant as a parent for new hybrids because it does so well in serpentine. It's really tough. And they want to sort of like breed that toughness and that ability to withstand like toxic soils into the like rhododendron bloodlines, I guess. So I thought that was really interesting. I don't really know much more than that, but um, yeah, it was another one that I was really excited to see. Really cool texture um, in the leaves. I don't guess that's tomatum. Okay, and then now we're officially off to the limestone barrens. So these two plants we saw in Bellburns. And this is a great example of plants can feel rare to individuals and they might not be for other people. So this is another example of a plant that I found on my own, this broom rape on the right. And didn't really think much of it, and then told Todd that night, like, oh, look at this weirdo I found. He's like, I've never seen that plant before. But it's not provincially listed, so things being provincially listed is not everything. Obviously it gives us information, but I would be curious about plants that are rare that aren't listed. I'm not necessarily saying this is rare, but it can feel rare to people, and people always have life lists and that sort of thing. And I was really happy to find this plant because it's hemiparasitic, so it kind of has an interesting story. And this pinguicula on the left is all over the place. So it was really nice to see like some of the same plants reoccurring and seeing them in different stages. And the first day you'd see only a couple, and then by the end you would have found huge patches. And this one is carnivorous. So we talk about other carnivorous plants much more than than this one. Okay. Okay, so we're still in Bellburns. So on the left, the anemones were out. And I really love this color combination in the barrens that you sometimes get between the lichen and the juniper and the anemone. That was really working for me. And this is another one of the plants that tricked me many times. I would think I found something sort of exotic and it was just an anemone. And then on the right, we have one of the Oxytropis. And underneath that is the Saxifraga Mayflower, oppositifolia. Some of these, you have to get used to saying them out loud again when you're just reading them all the time. But this guy is easy to ID too because of the leaf structure. It's very like geometric. Okay. All right. And we're very lucky that we made it up there for the yellow lady slippers in bloom and to be able to see them in many different sites and sort of compare all these twists and sort of observe them in terms of like height and what was eating them. And it was yeah, a true joy to see as many of them. And also to me, they're sort of comic looking. Like this reminded me of like a choir or something. Like to me, their faces are really expressive. So I gave them all little eyeballs. Um, but they're very structural. Sorry, guys. And we have a bunch of them growing in the garden. And it was interesting hearing people from all over the world who are on this trip talk about, oh, like so and so has that in their plant collection because these were all rock gardeners. So it's interesting to sort of get their perspective and to hear about like, oh yeah, I grow this other cypripedium in my garden in Raleigh or whatever. But this one does quite well at the garden, both in the ground, but we have one in a pot as well, which I don't really know how we did that. Somebody was good at their job at some point. Okay. On the left, one of the only plants that is not in Todd's book. So that's your secret sort of if you are looking for this plant and you can't find it in the field guide, that's why. And I totally fell in love with it. I think it's just the funkiest little thing. And it was really cool. We were on a call for that Alpine Seed Exchange that I mentioned a little while ago. And the horticulturist from the Denver Botanical Gardens said that this was her favorite plant. And I just thought that was so cool because I didn't know anything about the range of this plant. And so some of these, have quite a wide range. So it's very cool to think that, I'm stumbling upon it and very excited to see it. And then somewhere down in Denver, someone else is growing it in their in situ or in their ex situ conservation plot or whatever, and also feeling the same thing. I think that's pretty cool. And on the right here, we have another one of the herbaceous potentilla. I think this one is fairly uncommon as well. And I was really excited to find this plant. I think it's really beautiful and sort of like striking, unusual. And it was funny. It was many of these, this was sort of in a pocket of rarity. We were sort of like heading back to the bus and it was sort of just like growing in a parking lot. And I kept being like, oh, hey, what's this? And then making everybody come back and look at it. And then we walk a little more. And I was just having an eagle-eyed moment and saying, oh, wait, what's this? Making everybody come back and look at it. But yeah, this was great. So I think this is the snow potentilla, I want to say. Sorry guys, I'm not the greatest at common names. I'm just trying to get the Latin down really at the moment. The rest will come. So it's interesting, both of these plants, and I didn't actually realize that I put them on the same slide, but both of these plants are ones that I've grown in cultivation for many years. So again, it was like a local celebrity, sort of like you watch their movies or you're, anyway, I should stop using that analogy. But anyway, it was really exciting because I'd never seen these plants in the wild before. So we have Actaea rubra, so the red baneberry, and the alpine pussy toes. So if you remember the elegant pussy toes, you can see that this looks quite different. The coloring is the same, but we have quite a bit of both these plants of the botanical garden. But to see something in its natural habitat is really special, and it also sort of gives you ideas about how you can grow it in cultivation as well. When you see sort of its like natural form and how it wants to behave. Like I, for one, like to sort of mimic that in a garden setting if I can. It's also just cool that um, I'd never really thought of this pussy toes like as a native plant because to me it's such a strong like rock garden plant. But those connections can always be made, and cultivated plants had to come from somewhere. So in this case, both of these are native. Okay, and then we have the gentian opsis. Um, it to me it always looks like a plant that is like just about to open, but this is what it does. So the challenge here is similar to the Arethusa, trying to get a good picture, trying to get it face on, and I didn't quite do that. But I did want to sort of show all the buds that were still coming up. So we had seen quite a bit, but there's quite a bit like this saxifrage on the right as well, where there was still, quite a bit to come. So there's normally quite a bit to see up on the limestone variants. It's very worth it to go up there. And I just love this color of the gentian. I love gentians because of their range of color, but this one did not disappoint. Okay. And this is our first willow. So as you may or may not know, the willows are very difficult. There's many of them, they like to hybridize. So it's a real botanical adventure to learn about these plants, and you really do come to appreciate them and all that they do to survive. So this on the left is Salix vistita. I think it's the net veined willow. And I like this one especially because the leaves are just so quilted. Um, and they're just, the texture on them is beautiful. I would love to grow it in cultivation because to me, this is just like the most beautiful leaf. And on the right here, we have halopestes. And this sort of would grow in between the rocks on the seaside. And I really do like this leaf. It's sort of, to me, this is another one that I could see, growing on the edge of someone's pond in a cultivated garden, but it's very happy growing in between the rocks on the seaside, which must be an incredibly harsh environment. I can't even imagine what this poor little plant has to go through in the winter. I guess it sleeps very soundly in between those rocks. Okay. And then on the left, we have the alpine bistwort. And what I really like about this plant is it sort of shows the lengths that some of these plants have to go to reproduce. So this plant can get quite northern in its range, and it actually has propagules. So this little guy is not waiting to be pollinated, doesn't know sort of what's going to happen. So it has these propagules that sort of drop off and can create new plants. So it's kind of like, I don't need nobody else but me. I'm good. I can handle it. And I think that's such a cool adaptation for some of these plants that sort of know their situation, know the harshness of their environment, and have adapted to ensure their survival. And these alpine bistwort, they're everywhere. Um, but I still really like them. This patch was really nice. It was growing in between all these rocks, like really close to the ocean. And so it was a really interesting ecosystem. And then on the right, we have Iris versicolor and hooker eye. So I find this photo very, very helpful because learning the difference between the two, it's quite easy once you know, but it can be a big mystery if not. So to tell these two apart, to use color is not reliable, to use size is not reliable. Um, so the biggest thing between these two is the size of the standards. So we're looking at these main, I guess they're technically sepals maybe. And then we're looking at, these are the standards. So these little guys in between the big guys, right? So this is iris versicolor. So this is the blue flag iris. And the standards are quite large, right? They're like almost 3/4 of the size. But if you look at the iris hooker eye, these little tiny standards down here make it super easy to tell the difference between the two. There's usually a pretty dramatic difference. Um, and that's your sort of secret plant plant ID clue of the day, I guess. I just also love this photo, and this is sort of like what it's all about, and that's why I love being out in these areas with other um like horticulturists or botanists, I guess, because sometimes you do really need to like look at things side by side, or even just pass on these little details that, yes, you could totally get them in a key. They're, that's very doable, but I also like just sharing knowledge in that way. Okay. Another one of my favorites, and I'm not totally sure why, I think it's this blue and white combo. Stellaria longipes, definitely not rare. It's everywhere. But it's really lovely when you're looking in sort of like a more grassy area. You'll just see these sort of like strips of blue, and that's the Stellaria popping up. And yeah, that blue is really striking. And then another Selenia callus. So this one is much, again, pretty common and also grown in cultivation. But another one of those plants that it's cool to see in the wild. And it's also one of those plants that grows in quite a few environments around the world. So it's sort of like a connecting plant for many other places, feels like. Okay. And some of the dryas were open, not very many, but some of them were, and some of them had already gone to seed. But this is Dryas integrifolia. This is a different one than ones that grow. There are other Dryas that grow in like the Rockies and that sort of thing, but it's a different one. So we have integrifolia. Also, like, not to be mixed up with the anemone, they look kind of similar. And then we have Primula mysticinea. So there is often a little bit of confusion around the primulas. So there's Mysticinea laurentiana, and I think Groenlandicum. And they're slightly different, and they sort of play tricks on you because this one can be white or it can be purple. Some have there's distinguishing characteristics between them about whether or not they have like farina or not, like that sort of like powdery white. So if you're going into looking at the primulas, it's a good idea to sort of brush up on your key first, and then look really closely at what you're looking at, because it definitely took a little while and some close inspection to try to figure out what we were looking at sometimes. Oops. Okay. Okay, and the Great Pretender here. So the plant on the left, I had grown for many years and also had this plant inflicted upon me because it definitely can get a little bit weedy. And I was always told it was Viola labradorica, especially in BC. And I would sort of have a moment of, oh, Labrador. And then I moved back and I was told a lie. So it is sold as Labradorca, but on the left is actually the real Viola Labradorica. So um, quite different. The Labradorca on the right, which is not, is characteristic for these purple leaves and for being very, very tough and weedy. Beautiful. So people, it's not a weed if you want it. But I've also had to rip it out from a lot of places. So this guy on the left, the real Labradorica, did not seem to have any of those characteristics. I haven't seen it very much, so I can't say for sure. But um, yeah, it just goes to show that sometimes things in the nursery industry are sometimes things just get a little bit mixed up, especially when you don't have a lot of people to correct you. Okay. And we have another saxifrage. So Saxifraga cespitosa. This was sort of just coming into bloom. So you can see there's a lot of flower buds. This is another one that sort of wandered from the spot that we initially thought it was. This is growing like right down, like very close to the ocean, which was really surprising for me. I wouldn't really think that this plant would want to be that close, but it definitely was. So some bigger patches and some smaller patches. Okay. And then a really nice patch of this Armeria. Um, you see this sort of pop up everywhere. Um, but to get a patch that was sort of nicely in bloom and looked a little bit fuller was really nice. I feel like with some of these plants, you take a photo and you think, okay, like that's a really nice one. And then 2 days later, you see, oh, like that's a really nice one. And you're always searching for the best one. Um, but we love them all equally. And then here's our second endemic plant. So this is Salix jejuna. So again, it looks so much like so many of the other Salix, but this is only out at Cape Norman. So that is sort of one of the more helpful, I guess, ID points. And then we have a little Primula, probably Laurentiana down in the bottom. Okay. On the left is one of the cotton grasses, and everyone was so excited to learn about all the different kinds. Um, I hadn't really like thought that hard about it before, but there are many different kinds, and this is sort of a rustier one. Both these plants um, were this is Lance Meadows, so not limestone. Um, but yeah, and then on the right, just the most perfect patch of Primula laurentiana. It was gorgeous. I couldn't believe that it's like they were waiting there for me. um, it's great. Okay, and this is another good example of like this pink pyrola, this Pyrola acerifolia. In my mind, when I would read about it in the books, I would think that it was, you know, one of the more uncommon plants. For some reason, it just sort of looked like that to me. There are like lots of other pyrolas that are white that kind of grow in a more like woodland sort of atmosphere. So I was thinking that this pink one would be, really hard to find. And I was very wrong. This pink pyrola was everywhere. It was delightful. And I really liked this combination. There was sort of like this huge dead tree in behind. So it was really scraggly. And underneath, hiding it under it, was this mix of Cornus canadensis and this pink pyrola. And it was just such a good combo. I really enjoyed it. And this plant on the right, this Mitella, is another one that when we came out to Burnt Cape, I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure there's Mitella out here. And I had my like laser eyes on. And I truly did not understand how small this plant is. So the head of one of those flowers is probably the size of my pinky nail, maybe. And these sort of like spiky bits that are going around, those fall off fairly quickly after it blooms. So to see it in this like perfect state, and again, thanking myself and also Matt Levesque, who taught us about Google Pixel cameras, to get this photo just felt like a real, like when the world is crazy and everything is bad, and you know, you're standing in front of this plant and it's so special. It's like so limited in its range in Newfoundland. And you caught it on a day that it was like perfectly in bloom, and you had the resources to take a picture and you have the time to take a picture. It just feels really special. And like you're really there for like such a beautiful moment. I know that's kind of woohoo, but plants are a little bit woohoo. Um, and I think that's all part of doing this work as well, is really appreciating like how, I don't know, we get to see these moments in time that most people don't get to see, and a lot of people don't actually care about, and like it sucks to be them because it's amazing some of the stuff that you see when you're out there and you're really looking. I feel like it's very good for the soul. Okay, so again at Burnt Cape, I was so excited to see this fern. It was so beautiful. I feel like again in sort of rock garden world, like this is what we strive to achieve. So it was just really cool to see sort of like these habitats that we model after and then we try to replicate in sort of a more like unnatural environment. And this is us trying to do that. So on the right, this is in our new crevice garden, which is one of the first projects that I ever did at the Botanical Garden. Um, and here's the same fern. So obviously we didn't get it from like this spot or the wild. I don't know where Todd got it. Probably we're part of a lot of exchanges. So I'm not quite sure. I'll have to double check. Excuse me. But it's not quite as happy, but it's getting there. So you can come see it for yourself. Okay, so I just wanted to like very quickly sort of talk about plant ID because I'm sure many of us are in these situations where we are trying to learn about new plants, or we see a plant and we don't know what it is, or we just sort of want to like learn about plants in our spare time, I guess. So these are sort of some tips that I'd like to share just because um like this obviously that like this trip and all the past and future trips mean a lot to me, and I always want to get out of them the most that I can. And this could even be to just, after all winter you're really excited to go out and go for a walk. It doesn't have to be, a journey to limestone barrens, but what has really helped me sort of like quickly and um in a way that's really going to sink in. These are some of the things that has helped me with new plant idea, because in the very first slide you'll see that there is like 100 plants that I had never seen in person before, which as a plant nerd, like that's a lot. Like I don't know when the last time I saw 100 plants that I had never seen before. Um, so luckily I broke my ankle and I could study them. But anyway, so getting back to this. So like I said, it's all about pattern recognition. So the more you look at plants, this is including in a book, but also in real life, the better that you're going to get at plant ID. Um, and when I was sort of like out there and like really scanning everything, it was totally that behind the scenes pattern recognition that helped me, because I it wasn't that I was looking for what was rare. I was sort of like looking for what was like in a sea of like juniper and dwarf birch and like all the common stuff. I know those plants so well. So what my eyes are looking for is anything that isn't that. Um, and that was actually really efficient because you would look at something and I wouldn't often like know right away what it was, but I knew that it was worth like taking a picture of or looking up or thinking for a minute and be like, oh, that looks familiar. Where do I know that? Oh, yes, that's what that is. And it also meant that we found like other cool things like fossils or, things that you wouldn't really expect, but that you would like to pay attention to. Um, and like I said, this is not like hard study. This is like flipping through things when you have a few minutes. Like this is, you are out for a walk and you see a thylictrum and thylictrum and you take a picture of it and you put it on iNaturalist, but then somehow after doing that, you go down a rabbit hole and like 3 steps later you had a plant that you didn't know before. That sort of like fun exploratory sort of work. I did go ultra nerd though, and I did do flashcards. Um, because it's not only I guess about the like plant ID, but also like some of these genus and species, like some of the names, you sort of need to like see a couple times to get them to sink in because a lot of them aren't genus that I like grow all the time, like Galeris, like something like Platanthera, sure. Like I don't have to, learn Platanthera. I just need to learn like Orbiculata and then Hookeri and that sort of thing. But some of these are a real handful and mouthful. So it does sort of help to get all of that. You're sort of like laying the foundation so that when new things come up, they're not actually new, and then you're able to absorb them a lot quicker. Whatever takes tons of like I took pictures of everything, even things I had seen a million times. I took pictures of them because sometimes I would see other things in the picture. um, and sometimes you just have like strange forms. Um, and I think you folks all know that you all contribute beautiful pictures to the slideshow. It is helpful to know like where you are, what habitat you are. And that will, which again seems obvious. But at any point in time, can you name like what sort of habitat you're standing in? Because that really helps you narrow down what you saw. And also sort of like mentally group plants. So when you're doing that pattern recognition, you can sort of like add or take away plants based on the habitat, right? Okay, and then the most obvious of sources, but Todd's book, Wildflower and Ferns, Michael and Ann's beautiful book, Exploring the Limestone Barrens, John's beautiful website, Digital Natural History, and then Sue's eFlora of Newfoundland Labrador. These, I can't tell you how helpful they are, mostly because like the local knowledge is the knowledge. That's the stuff that is really, really so like precious and valuable. A lot of these plants, like I'm googling the heck out of them. And all sorts of stuff comes up, or there's just no information. And it's incredible after looking at like the data, the massive amount of data that the United States has. Um, when we come up here, like everything sort of just like drops away and it's harder to find the information. So I'm just very grateful for all the work that everyone else has done to put that information out there because it means that I'm a lot less frustrated all the time. Um, okay, and then there's things for like, for example, the most recent name changes where my go-to is using Q's Plant of the World online. And that sort of gives like a bit of a global perspective on some of these plants. And they also give a really good list of name changes. I know Sue does that as well on eFlora, but um, that's another resource. And I use that for ornamental plants as well. NatureServe Explorer is a really cool tool. I'm not gonna really talk very much about it, but basically you get a free account and you can explore Newfoundland and the rare plants of Newfoundland through this tool. So it tells you where rare species are roughly. And you can just learn a lot about your environment through NatureServe. Flora of North America and Encyclopedia of Life are also great ones. And I don't know how much people really talk about iNaturalist on here, but I have, like, through this whole process, just had such a huge appreciation for iNaturalist. So if you don't know what that is, or if you've never used it, it's sort of a global citizen scientist sort of project where whatever you see in nature, you upload it, and those are your like observations. So scientists and researchers can use that data to like study these plants. So it can help with conservation. It can help connect you with plants. It can help you keep track of what you've seen. So it's like a really valuable learning tool. I go back and look at my observations all the time. Um, you can click on an area and see the observations in that area. You can practice your plant ID. So again, like in Broken Ankle Land, I just would go on and I would help people ID their plants. And there were things that I had to like look up, you know, a few times, but by the end of that exercise, I could like riddle it off. And I was also just like looking at a lot of pictures of plants, which is really helpful in different sort of ecosystems. Um, and that's where a lot of the interesting conversations came up. So I had lots of really interesting conversations about like pictures of like dwarf willows from like willow experts from, you know, who knows where, who like specialize in willows. And they would say, okay, like I think it's this. And I would say, oh, okay, well, like based on being there, you know, and taking the picture, like I looked at X, Y, and Z, and we would just have these really cool conversations about like ID and what we're seeing and like what that experience was, and like in the with the orchids as well. So it's just like an incredible thing to be a part of. And I think like with research in the future that it's going to become an even more valuable tool. Also have like amazing forums and talk about etiquette and connect people. Like they're saying that there's a BioBlitz, which is associated with iNaturalist, um, going on the Northern Peninsula. So collecting some of that data that we're missing. And this is just a note, everything was so tiny. So remember the Galeris rotundifolia. This is my fingernail is sort of the standard here. Um, and just so tiny. And so you're really watching your step. You're really, you know, having like your laser eyes on, and just appreciating, yeah, the beauty in the tiny, I guess. Um, so after this trick, again, the silver lining of being hurt was being able to take all of these rare plants that I had just seen and being so excited about them and wanting to, you know, keep them safe and do conservation work. um, and then finding this course. So the big takeaways for me, and like I said, anyone can take it. You know, you can just sign up and peruse if you want to. You don't, obviously, like nobody's gonna make you take a test. But I really recommend it, even just for fun. So for me, the big takeaways for this was that like I'm just so glad it exists because it's so professionally well done. Um, and like really big experts, like the head of Nature Serve and like the head of I think it's run out of the California Botanical Garden or San Diego Zoo. Anyway, there's really, really big partners, like the biggest in the US have put this together. So they're sort of like my trusted source now. And if I sort of like have questions about things or want to clarify and really want to do like the best conservation work that I can do, this is where I go. And it's really inspiring because they share a lot of case studies and share like work that people are doing. And, you know, it's just nice to see success and to see, um, you know, what people have done that has worked and what might apply to us and like what we can do. Um, and just like the sheer amount of data that the US has, like I said a minute ago, it sort of like helps to fill in the gaps of like, okay, well, like what data are they using and like what do we have, what don't we have, who has it, can we bring it together? Is it just that I don't have it? You know, because obviously I, you know, there's always a lot to learn. Um, Yeah, and the importance of genetics. So genetics was not something like for me in horticulture that I had, you know, really done like a deep scientific dive on. And in this course, they do have really good like genetics component where they talk about sort of the science behind it and how that science is being used. So now more than ever, it, you know, it makes me want to participate in things like seed banks and or even collecting herbarium vouchers because that's, you know, there's so much learning to be done, and also keeping it at the forefront when we're doing sort of like seed collection, that sort of thing. um Getting genetic diversity and representation is sort of at the core of a lot of that. And it could be easy to forget that. Um, yeah, again, because I didn't do biology necessarily, I didn't really get sort of this like botany field work. I like did a lot of work in native plants and sort of like always skirted around it, but um this course sort of like filled in the gaps in that process, and um sort of it was like a glimpse into what botanists do professionally. Some of it I was sad that I missed, and some of it I wasn't when they're talking about all the technology. Um, and most of all, I'm just really excited about our ex situ conservation work at the Botanical Garden now, and I feel much more confident about like playing a much bigger role in that. Um, and it was just like really inspiring, and I was really happy that, you know, we're one of only um from what I know, like two botanical gardens that do this sort of conservation work. So it made me really proud that we are able to do that work. It made me very excited to like work with others and share information. We're doing a seed collection trip this year to help to expand on our seed bank. So I just feel like there's lots of great tools, and that I'm able to now share this amazing tool with other people that might be doing that work. Whereas before I would sort of be hobbling some things together. Okay. And I don't know how I'm doing on time, but these are just some last little like throwaway fun things that I put in because again, uh a lot of looking at this stuff inspires sort of like the ornamental work that I love to do. So these are sort of like some dreamy, you know, I would love it if our crevice gardens could look like these. So in the middle there is the leaves of Mitella nuda. So you can see like right here, that's a flower. But I was looking for the flower and I kept seeing these beautiful little leaves around. I was like, oh, I wonder what that is. But it was Mitella the whole time. Oh, and I never noticed this little guy down there. Huh. I have to look him up. Okay. Um, Very excited to find this fern on the right, at Lansom Meadows. Again, like the perfect little crevice. Hard to grow ferns like that, but that's nature for you. And then that maiden hair fern, just poking its little nose out of some rock. And like this crevice garden, this picture on the left, like that could be a crevice garden that someone planted. So that's the Sebaldiopsis with some partridge berry, and the same on the right hand side. So both of these are both at Lansomeadows again. So but just amazing what nature can do. oops. And then this was the group that we went with. I'm not there because I was at the hospital, but they were still having a great time. So that's great. They're really lovely. And it's nice to, you know, because of just like this group, it's nice to be around plant people. And this little bugger kept fooling me a million times. So in my scanning, I kept seeing this, which is not a what I was hoping to be a very rare or interesting plant, but it's actually a fungus that has attacked a plant. So this is Exobasidium. So it attacks a bunch of different Ericaceae plants. But it's this beautiful bubblegum pink. So I mean, I love fungus, so I was happy to see it, but I also it definitely got the best of me a few times. But it's quite beautiful. It's very unnatural pink color. And it kind of pops up, I would probably see it at least once a day. Um, and it was always sort of interesting to try to figure out what plant it was it had attacked, to be like, oh, okay, well, I think that might be bilberry, or maybe this is blueberry. I can't quite tell. Couldn't always tell. And then at Point Riche, we also saw a bunch of these really interesting fossils, which I was not expecting to see that. And I was it was a very pleasant surprise, I will say. Yeah, and just incredible rock. And on this day that we saw this interesting rock formation, I was really frustrated because I was just not getting the willows. Like I thought that I would get it and I would go like 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So this was this little tiny rock on the bottom. It felt like that was me. And then crushing perfectionism, wanting to know everything and not knowing everything was in the middle. And then it was like every willow was looking the exact same as this huge rock just on my shoulders, but I like to think I've moved past that a little bit. We're not sure. Um, yeah, and just like pets, like in fungi, I can prefer calcium rich environments. These are beautiful. They are everywhere. These what I would call them sunburst lichen, but they probably aren't. And I think that is everything. I apologize if that was a bit too long. I wasn't sure how to check the time and also keep my screen up, but does anyone have any questions?
Oh, Megan, that was wonderful.
Oh, I'm so
Yeah,
glad you liked
thank
it.
you so much. It was fabulous. Maybe what you would like to do, if you probably take your screen away, we could see people
Oh,
and
perfect.
maybe
Yeah.
talk if people have questions.
Okay. And I will put in the chat that course that I was talking about. So I'll find the link for
Hey,
that.
that would be great. Yeah,
Stop share.
let's see here. Wait, here. Lovely to see you. Oh, here.
Oops.
Anybody else who can show their face and speak up? We have, I know it's more than me out there, 30-something people tonight.
Megan, your images are just stunning. Beautiful. And the one of the pink pyrola with the crackerberry, the bunchberry. Oh, that's just gorgeous. That makes me want to get out again real soon.
Totally.
It's beautiful. I want to mention though, before everybody we leave, that it'd be great if someone does have a vehicle to help the Sioux out with the association. There's a number of people that do go up the Hawk Hills faithfully every year. If you got a vehicle that you can spare and help out for a couple of hours, just get in touch with us, and let us know. It'd be much appreciated. We have visitors coming in from outside the province, so it's nice to have a helping hand that if a couple of us are able to help out to transport them to the top, just let us know and we'll let Sue know.
I don't know how many vehicles the university has these days. I mean, at one time they'd have various and sundry vehicles that, if a professor or somebody could take out. It might be worth checking with Julissa if there's any university vehicles and maybe even somebody to drive.
No, John, because she's the one who asked me to ask people.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Well, I guess they don't. Well, it's a good idea, I thought.
So
Tough
if anybody
times at
has
MUN
a
these
few,
days.
anybody has a few free hours and it's a nice afternoon, it's a great way to spend just some time. Megan, the question I wanted to ask, and I don't know if you could really answer it, and I've always think about it, you know, with the iNaturalist and stuff. Do we know with climate change where if wildflowers are going outside their range, you know, you hear about the oceans are changing and species are coming north. Is there any change with plants? Because a couple of years ago there was a plant watch where we were to the botanical gardens, we were tracking plants. It doesn't seem, I don't hear much about plant watch anymore, but is there signs that, you know, the flowers are moving because
So
of the climate?
there's definitely signs that invasive species are moving, unfortunately. Which I think is going to be like the bigger issue. And I think for the native populations, they're slower to adapt and react to climate change. So like I would like to think that like in theory that they would, but what I see what is more likely is a range is diminished because of climate change. So the warming will sort of do the opposite before the plants can react, and because sometimes it's also not, especially
Express your opinion.
like geographically or like ecosystem specific plants, it's hard for them to like jump spaces.
Yeah.
You know, like so the ones that we're really concerned about, they wouldn't really have that. They might not have an ability, like even if you're thinking about, for example, like alpine plants, like how are they gonna how do they move? But
How do they adapt? Yeah.
yeah, I think that's where like the inspiring work that's happening like with the CPPC is people are doing that sort of conservation work, right? Where they're trying to do like responsible seed collection and create ex situ like populations, and then how to do reintroductions, and there's whole sections in that course about how to do that, which I think is amazing because to have a guidebook on that is like really helpful. But it's hard because limestone barrens, like it's difficult to do that work. So I don't know what that means for us.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, looks like you had a wonderful, wonderful time getting all those new plants.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that must have been really exciting for you to see things growing that you actually would have been recommending to people put in their gardens.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I gave a similar presentation to the Rock Garden Society,
Yeah.
and just to, you know, like get that, because that's why we do it.
Megan, what type of phone are you using? Your pictures are beautiful.
Oh yeah, it's a Pixel 7. So and me and Todd both got them after Matt's presentation last year, where he was doing the phone through the hand lens. But I can't get over the difference in the pictures. Like I, for the first time in my life, like have nice pictures to share. So
Gorgeous.
yeah, it's very exciting. So, and it, you know, it is probably less expensive than lots of the phones out there too. So if you need to make a change, because I'm never gonna like have a camera with me. I just know that about myself. So this was, yeah. I can put that in the chat too if you want.
Did you actually use a hand lens with the phone?
I didn't this time, just because we were a part of a group, and Todd walks quite quickly, so I had to, you know, take a snap, write things down, and then was running.
Yeah.
But on my own time, I would really like to try to experiment with that, because these plants are so small, and I really, you know, would love to see like that Malaxis, for example, that's so small, like all those little parts. You know, I think that would be really great.
But when you zoomed in, your photos were, the time you zoomed in, your photo was wonderful.
Mhm.
Double
Yeah.
clear. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I should do more zooming.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other last questions? Or even comments?
Well, I loved your enthusiasm. Judy?
It was wonderful.
The West Coast.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Prompted me to want to get up there this summer.
Good.
Mhm.
Yes, me
Mhm.
too.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Oh, thank
Yes.
you, Paul.
You do have lots of comments in the chat. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you. A
Yeah.
delight. Thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you guys. That's
I can
great.
send you a copy of them. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I
Okay,
can
well,
screech. too.
it's been a great night, and I think you got everybody fired up to go looking for wildflowers. All they
Yeah.
have to do is start showing up out from under the snow.
Yeah. Well, actually, we have the Mayflower, the Saxifraga oppositifolia.
Mayflower.
I never say that.
Mhm.
In the one that we have in the garden has huge buds. Like it looked like it was ready to break. So, yeah, it was sooner than we think.
So far, we have coltsfoot.
We do have cold sweat,
around.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's some heats blooming downtown too every
Oh,
now and then.
yes.
But yeah.
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 Megan, I thought I heard you on the radio talking about the danger though of this early spring for a lot of plants.
Yes, I had to be the negative Nancy to Jim Lester's enthusiasm. Just because, like, we did have, quite a bit of snow this week, and
Yeah.
also I just, climate change is so scary, and yeah, it could definitely do some damage, or at least confused, at the very least, confuse the
Mhm.
people and the plants. So, yeah, the unpredictable nature is not good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you, Megan, and thank everybody for coming tonight, and we'll see you next month again.
Yeah.
We'll see Michael and Ann, is it?
Yeah, we're going to the Azores.
Azores, okay.
Just
A
a
little
little
bit
different.
different.
Megan, we have a little gift we'll send along. Keep an eye out for it coming.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
do that.
Bye,
But I really
everybody.
appreciate
Okay.
it.
Thank you for coming back, Megan.
No problem. Have a good night.
Okay,
Good night,
bye-bye.
everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen
Oh, yes, no trouble.
and Ann. Thank you.